Are you all ready for a little jam session? Okay. So you are about to witness young creativity in action, a collection of poets who've been here for the last several days, part of a program we call the Creative Young Leaders Alliance. Yes. In its 5th year, this program builds on the Aspen Institute tradition of leadership building through seminars which read the great works of literature specially designed for the young artists of today to take on their role as the leaders of the future. They read everything from Aristotle to Adichie over the course of several days. They stage their own version of Antigone in the time-honored Aspen method, and they participate in seminars and ideas festival sessions. They meet with speakers. This last weekend, they met with Ava DuVernay and Hank Willis Thomas, and it goes on and on. But what they are doing is developing. They are developing their voices, not only as poets and writers and spoken word artists, but as young, vibrant members of society, and we are proud of them for their work. They are going to share with you now some of what made them come here to begin with, their own thoughts as they've written them and as they performed them. The poets you're going to meet today come from different places. They are associated with the National Student Poets Program, which is a program where there are ambassadors for a full year conducting workshops and doing events around the country. We have a young man, some of you heard yesterday at the opening, Allan Monga, recent immigrant to this country, poetry champion from Maine. And we have a young woman in her 2nd year here from Youth Speaks in San Francisco, performing and appearing here as a peer mentor for the others. I can't wait for you to meet all of them, and you're going to meet them as themselves, through poetry and through their work. This is what we're calling a jam session. You know what a jam session is? It's when you just kind of spit. You find your own voice and you collaborate with each other. So this is not meant to be Hamilton. This is not produced. This is not for that level of expectation. But what it is for is the expectation of hearing somebody say something that they mean. And now we'll just get started. Please welcome Kinsale and Ben, who are going to kick this off for us. Please welcome Ben and Kinsale.
Yesterday, all my troubles seem so far away. Now I need a place to hide away. Oh, I believe in yesterday. Suddenly, I'm not half the man I used to be. There's a shadow hanging over me. Oh, yesterday came suddenly. Why she had to go, I don't know. She wouldn't say. I said something wrong. Now I long for yesterday. Yesterday, love was such an easy game to play. Now I need a place to hide away. Oh, I believe in yesterday.
Although she feeds me bread of billions and sinks into my throat her tiger's tooth, still in my breath of life, I will confess, I love this cultured hell that tastes my youth. Her vigor flows like tides into my blood, giving me strength erect against the hate.
I am black, SpongeBob yellow, gap teeth, post braces, laughter, yearning for itself, solitude, yearning for itself. During an equinox, I will be turquoise for when the sun skinny dips into the rivers of Aspen. Aspen, how y'all feeling? Thank you so much for joining us.
My name is Jada Imani, and I'm here with Creative Young Leaders Alliance. Can I welcome all the creative young leaders here? They're all so brilliant. Welcome, you all. Welcome, welcome. Where they at? Come on, come on, come on. They'll have a chance to introduce themselves to you. Yes. These really brilliant folks that are talented in so many different ways that is so distinctly unique to each one of them. I'm so happy to be there with them. One thing we're doing is we're bringing you into the way that we like to rock. We like to spit our culture in a way. You know what I mean? So in our culture, we like to show a lot of love. So one way to show love is when you hear something, if you're digesting it, if you feel something, you can snap. Can I get some snaps? Yes, that looks so good. That feels so good. Also, you can let these words wash over you, and you can also digest these words and be nourished by them. When something is nourishing you, when something is delicious, like that lunch you just ate, that farro, okay? What's that sound you make? Exactly. That if you're really a pro, you can put it together like Yes. You can also say, go in, poet. Say it. Perfect. Poet, she added that. Awesome. Thank you so much for being here once again. We are so honored to be here, and we're so grateful to be working with Damian on his last year before he goes on to Juliet. Woo! All right. If you're ready for the show, make a whole lot of noise.
Let's bring up Camila.
Hi, I'm Camila. I'm from South Texas, and I'm the National Student Poet for the Southwest this year. And this is Deception and Jesus folded into fields. I am unearthing the stories that were left behind somewhere between here and home, repiping liquid from oil fields, flame and dust and grime gripping soft lung after palm, light and chain link fence, gasping for touch. Her, a woman of lowercase, careful cursive, 15 years old and a cog in the wheel of illegal domestic employment, following failing religion from borders to crushed red candy in the desert, sending wrinkled bills home in an envelope, a path worn by paper trail tracks and tall dryings of swooping flowers, a faith of air and water and bread, a hope that makes language seem limited, pitiful, in which a bird crumples against a window, in which a fly inches upward on sun-stained curtain, in which we gulp for air and we realize we do not belong. This girl, her soft smile lines, the toys she carefully picked for my birthday and Christmas presents from her weekly salary, this girl is not undocumented alien. Now she is 26 and has 2 children, married to a man that both demands her to work and demands her at home. 10 years later, she still irons in the kitchen, but it isn't the same. Meanwhile, I bake in border town socialite boutique, volley of insults and gum wrappers across lunch table, cautious entitlement, pretending to be cultured, stifling the ways that I don't belong in these spheres, quotation marks like cautious claw marks, they praise a return to law and order, and I have never been angrier in my life. The fields swallow her, smothered by dusk and remorse, rattling and sputtering ribcage, beauty and rage for a millisecond before falling silent, the way that the fields swallow everything else. Yeah. Thank
All
you.
right, let's bring up Juliet.
Hello, everyone. My name is Juliet Lubwama. I'm from Downingtown, Pennsylvania, and I'm the National Student Poet for the Northeast. And this poem that I'm going to read for you is titled Fingerspelling. Sand-dusted hands remind her of Uganda. Sun-kissed earth on sun-licked skin, gravel glinting in the grooves of her palms. Childhood is this. burying our skinny wrists into the sand, sitting half submerged in briny water, starfish and seaweed tickling our toes, sketching messages into the soil like prophets. For this rift may be wide, but we are wiser. Her arthritic fingers flutter, trace a shadow of a house, shaky and uncertain. I imagine grandmother young, her eyes crinkled like accordions, her cheeks not yet sun-kissed, her hips a sweeping hill, lips that whispered Luganda as if it were honeydew, sweet and seafoam green. I see young grandmother standing on a veranda I have only seen in photographs and sand, not close enough to grasp the murmurs of my budding father, not yet stern, still waiting for my mother. Only when two hands become four, mine on hers, does this rift between two worlds swallow itself. We speak through life, through consciousness, the shapes we outline in the sand, circles, handprints, a heart.
Welcome back, Ben.
All right, we'll do. Hi, everyone. My name is Ben. How's everyone doing today? Oh, thank you. That's good. Thank you.
Hashtag teamwork.
Okay, my name is Ben Lee. I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I'm the National Student Poet for the Midwest. The poem I'm going to share is called When Persimmons Come to Market. Kitchen table, and grandmother checks my vision, holds up 2 fingers, blink 3 and blink 4. Milky digits cloak her dusty sun until I relent and conjure the color of dried seaweed sleeping on a marigold tomato. No, she says, try again. She jerks her frosty fireball closer, and I have no moves left to play, but ask, what? Lips, pursed forward, pulse out the word, persimmon. Persimmon, say persimmon like it's tradition. My bones, so unbelievably eager, collect the falling syllables as if they were a lifeline. Persimmon, persimmon, persimmon. We are pitching words back and forth, back to front, like it's game, like we've played forever. Persimmon, persimmon. Don't have vision, isn't a persimmon. Don't speak persimmon. Persimmon, persimmon. Permission isms painting themselves in grooves across my chest for fruition. Persimmon, persimmon. Pronounce permission. You know, some of us never got to grow up without being tongue-tied. Thank you.
Please welcome Gopal.
Hey y'all, how y'all doing? How have the poems been? My name is Gopal. I'm going to be a sophomore in college right now, so this is my second year with Aspen. I was able to come here last year with Jada, and I was a national student poet too, from Texas. This first poem is called Physics of Falling. I came from more than womb. I came from stardust and spit, light shattering into bubble and singing with shimmering lilt, song and sight swirling almost until sound could be seen. I tuned my heartbeat to tectonic shifts and my voice to bird song. I've known about gravity since birth, which is to say I fell into this body. When I was born, I cried not from shock of this trembling world, but from fear of its fragility. I knew then, as gloves wrenched me from womb, that I was a stone stuck to cliff's edge by nothing more than weight. Weight, not mass, for gravity has always been in my definition. The way I cling to mother's hair from fear of free fall. The way I collapse into color like a star wakes up in the dark. the way I trip into poetry like a baby learns to speak.
All right, please welcome Kinsale back.
Hi, my name is Kinsale Hueston, and I'm currently serving as the National Student Poet for the West, and I'm from Southern California. The first poem that I'm going to be reading for you today is called Kill the Indian, Save the Man. For the 60,000 children oppressed, abused, or killed in the Native American boarding schools. My mama's grandma returned home from boarding school on the back of a horse, arms slung like an old Western over her husband's shoulders. I like to imagine her eyes, bright like a Utah sun, saturated with language that travels the lengths of her arms, collects like rain in her cowboy boots. I like to imagine her husband's face, smooth and smiling, leather brown beneath a tilted hat. I like to imagine strong arms that lift great-grandma off their horse, tangled in her blue bird flower bag dress, mottled like the bottom of a riverbed with scars, welts, ink that reminds him of the years he has barely left behind, ink that numbers him, numbered Native American children like branded animals. Mama told me that when she and my dad were married, they met her grandparents after the ceremony, 107 years old and sitting, talking, smiling, laughing. I like to imagine they were laughing at memories of their education, at ghostly hands that force-fed them assimilation and unfamiliar tongues. I like to imagine they were laughing because they outlived their torturers, bathed in culture like yucca froth, mapped the universe like grazing paths. Mama likes to say they beat the boarding schools. And I feel this pride like 100 blooming indigos, just as I feel their eyes watching me from above the arching back of a desert rainbow. Thank you.
Please welcome Annie.
Hi everyone, I'm Annie Castillo, and I am the National Student Poet for the Southeast region this year. And today I am going to read two poems, but the first of which is called I Am a House, after Rainer Maria Rilke. This is her bedroom. Just now I've been so softly wakened. How far do the limits of visiting stretch? Where does haunting begin? She stands beside me in the silk-veiled in-between. I want to call grief yellow and pretend it is a matchstick, not a forest fire. They rename funeral as closure, like it isn't ripping seams or chewing thorns. I wear an ugly dress that day just to see if she might return to criticize it. One night a year, I unearth old ghosts and name them. They roam my body until curfew beckons them back to the grave. Thank you.
All right, please welcome Allan.
Hi, my name is Allan Monga, and I'm originally from Zambia. Currently, I'm living in Maine, Portland, Maine. I'll be a senior in the fall, and I am the Poetry Out Loud state champion for Maine. And today, I will be reciting The Song of the Smoke by W.E.B. Du Bois. This is a powerful poem that has, spoken to me as an immigrant when I got here, and enjoy. I am the smoke king. I am black.
I am swinging in the sky. I am ringing words awry. I am the thought of the throbbing males. I am the soul of the soul toil kills. Wraith of the ripple of treading reels, up I am curling from the sod. I am wailing home to God. I am the smoke king. I am black. I am the smoke king. I am black. I am weaving broken hearts. I am sheathing love's light darts. Inspiration of iron times, wedding the toil of toiling climes, shedding the blood of bloodless crimes. Lurid, luring, met the blue, torrid, towering toward the true. I am the smoke king. I am black. I am the smoke king. I am black. I am darkening with song. I am hearkening to wrong. I will be black as blackness can. The blacker the mental, the mightier the man. For blackness was ancient and whiteness began. I am dabbing God in night. I am swabbing hell in white. I am the smoke king. I am black. I am the smoke king. I am black. I am cursing ruddy morn. I am hearsing hearts unborn. Souls unto me are as stars in the night. I whiten my black men, I blacken my white. What's the hue of a high to a man in his might? Hell, great, greedy, grimy hands. Sweet Christ, pity toiling lands. I am the smoke king. I am black. Thank you.
Welcome back, Jada.
Thank you. There's so much power on this stage right now, y'all, isn't there? And it's so special that you're here to share this experience. I don't take lightly to that. It's a very special thing that you're here. We are sharing this together. The distance between us and the division that you may see between us on stage and you there is an illusion. We are, in fact, sharing this experience. I'm going to sing a song for y'all. I'm a little nervous, but it's essentially you singing the song, too. We're singing it together, all right? We're sharing it. All right. I wrote this song, and it's produced by Oakland Future Trio. Ready.
All right.
Go, Jada. Thank y'all. No ticket came from any other. Take your look inside. Meet with yourself, the train conductor. Take your little ride. I'm visiting the spirit of a kindle broken dreams. Watch the colors mixing up, blue skies and forest greens. Embraces over shaking hands, all elements will meet.
Passion of the fire, dancing earth bodies. Vitality of water which is lifted by the wind. To the noses in the city, smell the pot melting. Some attempting to devour more than the stomach can. To avoid seeking dollars like him with stomach rumbling. Them cycles of injustice, downward spirals will confront them with our smiles anyhow. Don't look down unless you're tending to the sprouts in the ground. Saying, grow, 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 saying, grow with me. Cause once we're self-sustaining, oh, we all will be free. From Monsanto to compost, take off your bling bling. We're not defined by our clothes, but our self-esteem. Choke up, power up the train, and you're in the front seat. All aboard, depart the station. Ooh, ooh,
I told you we're gonna sing together, all right? I already told you, I warned you. Get your vocal cords ready, all right? Yeah. When I say I, you say I. Let me hear it. I said I. Ooh, I. Snap with it. I. Snap with it. I. Thank you so much.
Hey, can we get Jada one more round of applause? Thank you so much. You brought all the energy. So this next poem, I wrote it in memory of my grandfather. It's entitled Underdogs. 1. Under this dog, little seeds suckle without fear or patience, milk and light flowing free. When a puppy is born, she can't live long without her past. A future feeds on milk and memory. And mother, who else distills the two? No baby rises up ready for the world. No body is ready to leave it. 2. Under this dog, her baby's cries carve away at weakness, marble melting into gemstone, precious only when not in the puppy's possession. Who can ever carry the heft of an ancestry until it's threatened? 3. Under this dog we grow, little brown bodies huddled for warmth in this strange land. Under this dog, we puppies sing aloud as we swallow story, struggle, suffering. Under this dog, we embrace each other and step outside, bellies for the last time full. Wow.
Hi everyone, my name is Ben again. I'm going to be sharing a story that I wrote for my family. It's a poem. It's called Document. Document, archived May 12th, 2018, Edina, Minnesota. In my family, languages mixed together like red wine and water goes down smooth and heavy. Raw fish, white rice, chicken wings. There's too much food for talking mouths. And my grandmother, wearing a plastic tiara and silver sash, smiles like a good dream. Even through my cell phone screen, I can still see her eyes flicker, pastel balloons, tissue paper, crux, lemon laughter, all shaking because of unsteady hands, my hands. looking at hers. And if I watch the video again, I'll still think she pulled that ring out from nothing. Call it opal magic. Call it warm. Call it refugee redemption, or call it what you want, because that stone remembers for her. Country dead, family fled, diamond washed down the drain. That ring, made like Busan sky, is more documentation than this will ever be. And me, half-baked, wondering how someone can be living history. Thank you.
This next poem that I'll be reading is titled Warren Powell, for the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, and for Warren Powell, who at age 14 was lynched for frightening a white woman. Who knew that tiny summer legs and sugar sticky hands were frightening? I picture his face covered by the crowded southern trees, so warm and suffocating, yet I still see him clearly. Maybe they heard his name like war and pow instead of worry, due to power put in the wrong hands, which is to say, power put in the hands of the few. Maybe he was too sticky, or maybe he was too shadow, attaching his black body to white walls with the dejection of an unanswered prayer. The trees must have made him something unholy, made him into what he's not, and it's always the familiar thoughts that make us the most frightened. The necklace round his throat looks like a drawstring. History says, I'm tired, let me hang, and we don't listen. I pull down a light switch in the shape of 14 lost years, and an unseen forest clicks into existence, but I dare not turn my head. Everyone I've never loved is waiting.
My favorite song. So I'm an MC more often than I'm a poet, so I'm gonna do some bars for you, okay? Only 19, but I've had a lot of lies. Still I feel the pressure like I ain't got a lot of time. Yesterday, Bay J opened up her mind. Today she roped up in the grind and she hoping for a dime. A dozen months in a year ain't one for frontin'. 3 years passed and I ain't saw my cousins. They out here having babies and I'm out here having maybes. I'll book a flight and maybe hanging man procrastinating. Walls covered in pictures, call me by my flickers. Subconsciously I mirror the posse that I fear of. How would Jada, Imani get on this, be honest. Blazing my body in comments, I'm launching new line of thinking. Wavelength Uranus, my life is a blink in the eye of a goddess. I'm rather insignificant, but rhymes tell me I'm killing it. Died and then I riz again, rose again, put prickles in these poses, pins to stick them when they fibbing. Rebel on a cellular level, I cannot spell no. Ain't stressing off these melons, I'm smashing them with my shell toes. Karma is your unwashed laundry, you ornery. Thought she didn't peep what you had on, be you funny.
Okay, again, I'm Annie, and the second poem that I'm going to read is something pretty new. I wrote it about 4 days ago, but I think it might be kind of universal. I don't know. So here's Ode to Last-Minute Babysitting Requests. Nothing makes me a snow-stunned swallow like a last-minute babysitting request, like, please come watch our child, and we'll come home tipsy 2 hours late. I button my coat and walk to their house in the dark. They rush out like salmon spilling from a waterfall into nighttime's open paw. The baby is fat and doe-eyed and quiet, murmuring soft non-words to himself as we watch TV from the couch. I look at us, him sprout-soft language spilling out, me wanting to make motherhood of warm hands. He doesn't know he's been left for a bit of drinking and gossip, just like I don't yet know I've been paid for it. Together, we wait for their return, watching the moonlight pour in like a silver flood onto us, as if to make an empty house a home. Thank you.
Hi again, I'm Camila, and I'm going to read you a poem that I wrote about the guilt that we can sometimes feel as the children of immigrants. There are some generations that give everything and sacrifice everything for the idea of the American dream, and usually, sometimes, it's not that generation that will achieve it. So yeah, this is about my family, my grandmother, and me. Selfish, a study in ambition, migrants, Oaxaca, 1985, and disheartened mosquitoes softly thudding against the window screen. Heritage is serrated. Like a child, it pushes you from the top of the playground slide face first, pebbles blooming bruises onto your chest, the color of stagnant rain puddles between train tracks, colors that last decades burned into my eyes. A lifetime later, I still shake wind from my hair while generations of gritted teeth and stifled screams slip through the shower drain, drift somewhere at the bottom of a river that stitches one country to another, remnants of another life, stuffed behind the back panel of a linen closet, accompanied by uncertainty. Anticipation drips from the eaves of this borrowed house like the mason jar honey my grandmother traded on the street corner for bulk detergent, and I remember a perpetual layer of anxiety, filling a space, a cosmos of scorched candle wax, wrinkled pages from math workbook, contents of a briefcase, littering galaxies on Court's living room table, the absence of migrant mother and father who followed the lure of the harvest 4 months out of the year. The lessons of this country often break you. For me, it is blossoming guilt every time I forget things were not always so easy, every time I reject my grandmother's calls because all she has done for years is tell me that everything hurts, but of course it does. Decades ago, she receded into the factories of California and did not emerge, bent over conveyor belts, canning fruit for the wages reserved for female Latinas, working 2 jobs at home to keep my mother out of Southside public schools, wastelands of dropout rates. I look at my grandmother, the years gaping canyons carving through her unmoving face, and I want to tell her that it paid off. Hope tumbles from its despondent grip on the sides of train cars, life smashing open on the rails, and I know I could never understand, never pretend to know how it feels to literally die for opportunity, to become something half alive and to drip despair, to tilt your face towards the sun until your skin becomes unrecognizable, until you begin to sprout roots, one for each of 7 children keeping you from jumping, until the fine print of the until you've looked too long and realized that the fine print of the American dream will rip generations from your palms until your descendants can finally reap some form of success. I am afraid to ask if my ambition is selfish and why the price for privilege was so high, and why people insist on claiming that Mexicans can waltz into a country and steal jobs as if life is something you could pocket, as if a family, an entire ethnicity is disposable. I've never had to harvest in my life, and yet my hands still bleed. Thank you.
Hi again. So the next poem I'm going to recite is a Lord Byron poem. It's called She Walks in Beauty. So this is all for the ladies, the sisters, the mothers, the grandmothers, you know, everyone, especially for you, Heather. So yeah, enjoy. Sorry, I have a flow, so. She walks in beauty, like the night of cloudless climes and starry skies, and all that's best of dark and bright meet in her aspect and her eyes. Thus mellowed to that tender light which heaven to gaudy day denies. One shade the more, one ray the less, had half impaired the nameless grace which waves in every raven tress, or softly lightens o'er her face, where thoughts serenely sweet express how pure, how dear their dwelling place. And on that cheek, and all that brow, so soft, so calm, yet eloquent. The smiles that win, the tints that glow, but tell of days and goodness spent. A mind at peace with all below. A heart whose love is innocent. Thank you.
Hi again, I'm Kinsale Hueston, and I will be reciting a poem I wrote called After This Is America. We are the generation that will fight for those we have lost to bullet holes and unjust systems. We remember, but we do not forget the chokehold of oppression, its familiar blood flooding our TV screens, our neighborhoods. This is America. Big guns and angry mouths that believe fear can shrink us into submission, racism, grief, pale hands that tremble at dark figures on the streets at night. But we are also America. Black excellence and beautiful brownness and a magnificence we call diversity. We are America, the love our ancestors gave immigrants and indigenous brothers and sisters alike, interwoven hands at protests, flowering spirits that carve sanctuaries out of ancient spaces. Time's up, and me too, but never again. Kneeling during anthems that echo with injustice and standing for what's right when we've been told to sit down and shut up because we're too young to understand. Well, I promise you, we understand. They only talk down to us because they know we're not afraid to rise up against them.
Beneath the touch of time's unerring hand, like princess treasures sinking in the sand.
sketching messages into the soil like prophets. For this rift may be wide, but we are wiser.
Weight, not mass, because gravity has always been in my definition.
Once a year, I unearth old ghosts and name them. They roam my body until curfew beckons them back to the grave.
Persimmon. Say persimmon like tradition.
Laughter, yearning for itself. Solitude, yearning for itself.
Rattling and sputtering ribcage, beauty and rage for a millisecond before falling silent. The way the field swallows everything else.
I feel this pride like 100 blooming indigos, just as I feel their eyes watching me from above the arching back of a desert rainbow.
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 Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it for the creative young leaders. Okay. So we're going to do a little discussion now, and you're welcome to have Q&A from you if you want to ask them questions. We're going to tell you a little bit more about the programs. And before I get any further, I have to thank the outstanding, extraordinary staff that has made this possible for them. Could everybody from the arts program and from Scholastic and from Princeton stand, please, who have made this possible. Thank you, Dan, Veronica. Yes. Thank you, Ellie. All right, so we're going to have mics in the audience, but I thought we'd just start by you've introduced yourselves, but maybe we could just go around quickly, and I think you have a sense of why they write already by their words, but maybe we had this discussion with Ava DuVernay the other day where she asked you that question. Why do you write? What do you write about? Maybe we could just go around and start with that. Annie, why don't we start with you? And do you have a mic there? Pass the mic. There we go.
Okay. Hi, so I'm Annie Castillo. I'm a rising senior in high school, and I'm the National Student Poet for the Southeast because I'm from Virginia. I would say that writing for me is survival. It's a way of understanding the things around me, and I know that poetry for some people is about making the world more beautiful, but I think for me, it's about being okay with the world not being beautiful and knowing that we're going to make it anyway. And I write a lot about my family, especially my grandparents and their journeys here to America as immigrants, and history and just the world around me.
Beautiful. I'm going with Juliet.
For me, poetry has always been a way of making sense of my identity and the world around me. I write about my identity as a Ugandan American and as a Black American. And I write about the things that happen in the world around me, whether it be police brutality or immigration. And I believe that poetry has the ability as well to change people's minds. Because I always think that if I can write poetry about my experience as the daughter of immigrants, and if I share that with other people, they'll be able to empathize with that. They'll be able to understand through poetry. And that's what I really hope to do through this form of art.
Allan, so you're more of a recitation poet. But
Of
I have
course,
a feeling that
yes.
that may be developing a developing story, especially after your time. But tell us about your relationship with poetry.
So with me, growing up I had, little or no idea of poetry, from my home country, Zambia. But when I got here, which was like 11 months ago, yeah, I think.
How long ago?
11
months.
11 or 10 months ago. So I discovered poetry at my school through one of my teachers. I was just seated in a class, and she was like, "Hey, Allan, do you know what this is?" I'm like, "No, I have no idea what this is." So I just grabbed the paper, the Lord Byron poem, and I was reading it, and I felt this deep connection to the words. I mean, it was just as though someone was like, tapping me in the back and telling me, you walk in beauty and all that. So it was like, that was a turning point in my life. Ever since I discovered poetry, I'm more happy, super hyped every day, So, I just appreciate all the writers, you guys, So, I am a newbie in poetry, but I'm definitely now thinking of, writing my own words, and yeah, but, poetry is the key.
Gopal.
Yeah, so I was similar. Poetry was never something that I really thought about before I just jumped into it, but I think that now when I look back, if I find a poem that I really enjoy, the quality it has is not necessarily that it's short, long, beautiful, ugly, whatever. It can be whatever. But for a poem to be effective for me, I think it has to name something that I've always felt but didn't know how to describe. It has to give me a vocabulary that I didn't have before. And I write to build that for myself. That whenever I write poetry, I know that everybody else, how do you know when it's done? Is it short, too long? I don't know until I've named something that I couldn't have named before starting. I think that's in poetry, it's in all art, but that's a really cool skill. And I think if you start, no matter who you are, if you start reading poetry and you find stuff that clicks with you, it has that ability to really teach you about what you've always felt but didn't know how to say.
Kinsale.
Growing up, my childhood was filled with stories. My mom, who's Navajo from the Navajo reservation, would always tell me stories of her grandparents, and the poem that I read, the first poem that I read is a story she told me. It's true. It's a true story. And I had no way of retaining these stories, and I really wanted to make my own stories. And I live in a county where only less than 1% of the population is Native American, and I grew up splitting my time between there and a place where 100% of the population is Native American. And I felt like my identity was kind of regained once I found poetry as a way to channel this storytelling and this love for my culture and share it with a community that didn't know much about my background. So for me, poetry is a way of personal healing, but also an outlet for activism and advocating for a people that is usually very overlooked in mainstream culture and art.
I'll just echo everything that everyone just said, because I definitely feel all that. I love to write about my family, and I love to record the stories that they tell and kind of put my own spin on them. I also love to write and talk about my home state, Minnesota. They all know that I probably talk about it too much, but I just love where I'm from, so yeah.
I'm Camila, and I think that there are too many stories that are not told, that we never hear. And we see a lot of things on the news, but we never attach it. I feel like we can never actually attach it to a real person. And I just think poetry was my way initially of telling the stories that people don't hear and that I felt needed to be heard. It was also a way for me to deal with a lot of things that have existed in my life for my entire life, and that there are a lot of these things that we never really face or know how to express, and it's very important to express them, because poetry is, I think, one of the most compelling and beautiful ways and emotional ways that you can advocate for something or tell a story. So that's why poetry has been very important for me.
I first started writing from a place of like, down with the system. It really gave me a lot of life, just the radical rage, like Dead Prez and Public Enemy type, Rage Against the Machine type. Shouts out to my dad and my mom for raising me on that, and my older brother. And then recently, it's shown me like how I'm growing. Now it's becoming more introspective. Now it's becoming more of a, like Kinsale said, like healing, a self-healing process, speaking healing, and kind of like a personal therapy session sometimes. But you all don't need to hear all that. But yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, so we're going to start taking some questions from the audience now that you know a little bit more about these guys. So if you have a question, raise your hand. And we'll get a mic to you. And if not, if you don't have questions yet, start thinking about them, and then we'll keep going. I thought, so before, okay, we got one over here. Lisa knew, actually. Very exciting.
You do need a mic.
Loved your talk earlier.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But stand up. Sure. Hi. Thank you all. They were wonderful, beautiful poems, and your performances were big. I love them. I also noticed that you're really good listeners, and you were teaching us to be good listeners. Like the best lines, you were all, or the lines I thought were the best lines, you were hearing them. And so I wanted to ask, I guess, two things. How have you all developed your listening skills? It's not always easy to catch everything in a poem you're just listening to someone recite. How do you do that? How do you work on your listening skills? And also, if you do read poets or listen to other poets, who are the poets who matter to you?
Okay. How did you develop your listening skills? And you can name some poets that matter to you. Anybody can jump in.
The first time I went to an open mic, I remember these poems, like this one really beautiful black girl wrote a poem about being tall, and she just put that, and like I was like, oh my God, she's talking about being tall, but she's unfolding it in this way that's taking me on this journey, and I'm just moved, I'm shook. And so that was the genesis of even like writing my own poetry. I had to go home that night and start it because of the way I listened to every word, so like meticulously constructed to move me. So like honoring even the beginning of that like poetry writing journey is like listening. And also it's a part of being empathetic, and I think a lot of us artists are born very, very sensitive. So that's just that. But then working with mindfulness and social justice, a lot of that is like active listening practices, and that's things that we can attend workshops on too.
Yeah, I would totally echo everything Jada just said, but for me, like, it's always been a little different because I came into poetry, I think a lot of you guys, I thought poetry was something like old, like dead white people did, like that people don't do still. And I couldn't have been more wrong, but like the reason how I got into it was through photography and a really great English teacher. So it was always a visual experience first. And so whenever I would listen to like normal people just read random poems, in the beginning I would get bored, I would zone out. But then once I started thinking about like what they're actually crafting with those words, like what visual they're building, then I would close my eyes. And then when I started closing my eyes to imagine it, I was like, damn, like they could literally take me anywhere. Like with a photo, you have to be there, you have to capture that. But with a poem, you can teleport you, and that's awesome. Like that's really like, so if I listen well, like it's when I'm closing my eyes, it's when I'm imagining it. And I think some of my favorite poets like do that so well. Like I love like a lot of the young poets coming up now. Like I think all of them are dope, first of all. Like the program that we're a part of, like the National Student Poets Program, it's been such a great community for me because I've met other poets my age who are just making crazy work, and it's so cool to get to talk to the people making it. But in terms of like older poets too, like I think Ocean Vuong, he's one of my favorite poets. A little bit, he's a little older. But yeah, just there's so many incredible poets. I think my teacher in college, Austin Smith, he's a really great inspiration for me. Nicole Brown, who's one of my mentors earlier on. All these are like really great poets that you guys should definitely read.
A lot of us have shared about how we grew up listening to our grandparents and our parents' stories, and how these things have really translated into our poetry. And I think that listening, really listening once you're old enough, gives you the ability to notice the things about your life that are a little bit different, that are special, that need to be shared, things about your lives and other people's lives. And I feel like that's especially true for me, because in both of my poems, I talked about people that were have been constant fixtures in my life. My grandmother and my family's, lifelong housekeeper, that girl. And for a long time, I grew up around them, and I never noticed the really powerful things about their stories that, once I really listened and examined these things, made me feel everything that I talked about in those poems. The guilt, the shame, the realization that it is sheer dumb luck that I'm not in their positions. Listening gives you the ability to tell those stories, to see the things about those stories that are especially important, that other people in your community and around you and even in your family might have stopped noticing a long time ago. And as for poets that have inspired me, I kind of found my way into poetry through Latinx poets and writers, like Sandra Cisneros. I really like her. I've always liked her. And Juan Felipe Herrera, who we've met and is a wonderful poet. He has a very unique and lively, but still incredibly real way of looking at culture, at our culture. And especially Ada Limon, who is, if you haven't read her, you must. She's incredible, and I think anyone can connect with her. Thank you.
I think that how I learned to listen at first was just out of respect. If I were sharing something, I'd want everyone to look at me and listen to me. But I think understanding came from listening for years to poets. So I think there's a difference between listening and understanding, and listening out of respect. And I feel like the understanding came from experience. And for me, when I'm snapping or I'm going, and I feel something, it's because I literally feel something. And over the years, I've kind of formed this connection and to the words that these poets are saying, especially when it's personal or something that just hits really hard. There's this feeling that I'm being listened to, and I'm not even the one speaking, but there's a connection between me and the poet that's reading. As for my favorite poets, I learned how I recite poetry from watching other poets and listening to them and understanding why they're saying things the way they are. So Langston Hughes, I love the rhythm. Federico Garcia Lorca is one of my favorite poets of all time, and that has influenced the way that I write romantic imagery, but also he was an activist and an advocate, and he was passionate, and that really influences how I compose myself on stage. But also Louise Erdrich is one of my favorites. Ben and I got to read at her bookstore in Minnesota a couple months ago, so that was amazing, and she was the first Native American poet I ever read. And listening to her read just changed my mind about the way that I could tell stories. And she was the first time I saw myself reflected on stage, and that connection it really changed my life, I think.
Okay, I'll be really fast because I don't want to monopolize too much time. But I think everyone here who really knows me knows that I cannot stop myself from interrupting other people. I can't, I try so hard, but I just always want something to say. I think coming from a big family where everyone's talking over each other and you have to fight to say what you want to say. But I think the way that I'm able to listen is when I'm being listened to. I can listen to poetry because when I'm writing poetry, other people are listening to me and I'm heard, and it's really hard to hear other people when you feel like you're dying to say something. So when you can finally say something, you can listen, and that's why I think poetry is so important.
Okay, we could keep going, or we can take another question, or keep going. Allan.
So for me, just it's kind of different. The fact that I'm new to poetry, I have this crazy idea of what helps me to listen. So and one of the things that help me the most is imagination, like imagery. Just to echo on what he was saying, like when a person tells you, "Hey, pay attention," like you pay attention. But with me, it's when someone says, "Okay, I'm gonna recite a poetry." I don't know what happens to my ears. Like they bust out with that Superman ability and skills like that. So imagery helps me a lot, and I don't know, like if I say, okay, a blue iPhone. So I want you to raise your hand if you imagine a blue iPhone. Okay, keep your hands up. Now, I want you to raise both your hands if the color just changed. See? So that helps me a lot. Like, just imagery and, and once a person, reciting a poem says that something that impacts me the most, I don't know, I just feel someone behind me taps me and he's talking to you. So that's how I've developed my, listening skills. Yeah.
And Juliet, you're last, I think.
Like to echo what Gopal and Allan are saying, I think that one of the biggest things for me, if I want to make sure that I am listening to someone else, I have to take that extra step and imagine what they're saying and make that image in my mind, because at that point you're not just taking in words, you're making an image in your mind and you're applying their words and making it into your own thing. So I think that that's one of the most important steps in listening, taking it in as your own and making that image so that you can make sure that you don't just listen, but you also remember what they're saying.
Ben?
I'll just quickly add that when you're listening to a poem and you're trying to digest a poem, you're gonna experience some indigestion. Because, you can't take it all in like one sitting, like that's not possible. And so you naturally pick and choose by instinct. And it's a physical reaction. It's like when you get chills from something. It's like that. You're reactionary to it because you only have so much time to digest it. You can only digest so much. I'd also just like to plug one of my favorite poets. His name is Michael Bizet. He's from my hometown. I think he's great. So.
No, it's interesting that. Sorry. Is your question? Right.
In an earlier discussion today, they were talking about STEM and the need for STEAM and arts education. I'm curious, is your arts education poetry emphasis, is that supported in the schools that you're in, or are you finding other outlets in your communities that are supporting what you're doing? How is the education system shaping you, and what other outlets do you have?
I'd say to take off of that and even add more, you could talk a little bit about the programs that you're a part of that brought you here, because we haven't really gotten to explain that fully. So anybody can take that.
Absolutely. I am so glad to get the opportunity also to plug You Speaks, because my favorite poets in the world of poetry are in You Speaks, or I found them through You Speaks. So shout out Gabriel Cortez, Natasha Huey, my mentors, Aaliyah Bradshaw, killing it, MC and amazing poet. And yeah, they're incredible. So, and You Speaks is also the reason why I'm here right now, because they partnered with Aspen Institute. So You Speaks was also my, as I said, introduction to poetry. That's not in school. I did not find them through school. I found them through another program. I needed a job, so I went to a program that at 15, and they set me up with a job. They did it by compatibility with my personality. They put me in an art studio that was also like a semi-homeless shelter, semi-jobs training. It was a lot of trauma, a lot of healing, a lot of stuff going on. I learned how to, I got my first step of leadership there and got introduced to You Speaks, and I've been working with You Speaks for years. I actually left high school after freshman year because I found that it did not support me in my growth mentally, emotionally, or spiritually. I felt very depressed, and I felt very invisible. And I was very sensitive to how institutionalized things were and how much that it it just like whatever, like it kind of strangled and stifled my creativity. And so I went to independent studies for sophomore, junior, and senior year. There I started an organization called Top 2 Vision, and we've been going strong for 3 years now, and been rocking with a lot of different organizations, and that's been really transformative. So yeah.
Good. Are you going? Okay. So I would say I go to George Mason High School in Falls Church, Virginia, and I think overall it's a really great school. I've had a wonderful time there, and I'm so lucky. But I do think that this pattern I'm seeing all the time is this belief that the creative arts, and more specifically poetry, is unnecessary, that it's a luxury, something we shouldn't waste our time on. And honestly, that couldn't be more untrue. I think poetry for me has been a huge part of my growing up and my figuring myself out. But in my own school, there's a really strong push to be applying to the top colleges and going to STEM conventions and on the robotics team, and that's wonderful. That is what some people do and what they love. But sort of left in the shadows are these people who are looking for creative outlets, and I haven't seen as much support for poetry and literature as I'd like to in my own school. It's often rushed through. The poetry unit is something people are miserable about because we're reading these stuffy old poets that no one really cares about anymore. And I think the way that I've sort of grappled with that is trying to carve out my own spaces outside of school. But there's a problem there, right? Because if you don't have the money to be pursuing these programs, you just aren't going to be able to pursue what you love in a way where you can get that formal training. And that's really a really devastating problem of inequity. I'm seeing these students who are brilliant and they have nowhere to go to foster their skills. So one thing that I've tried to do is start a poetry club at our local middle school where I mentor these kids, and they can sort of try things out and explore and be wrong and be interested. And I think it would be great if we could have more like that so that you can get the same growth in poetry as you get in math and science, because it really is fundamental.
Well, I do personally go to a STEM high school, and basically everyone at my school wants to be a doctor or an engineer or a programmer. So there really isn't a lot of space for English and the arts in general. So personally for me, I've had to go outside of school to practice my poetry. But I feel that in this past year, and I actually think this is partially because of me becoming a national student poet and being able to communicate with my peers. My school and the people around me, we've begun to realize something that is really important, the fact that STEM and poetry and the arts, they are not exclusive, they can overlap. Like, for example, I personally want to be a doctor, and I was attracted to being a doctor and the sciences because of the potential of healing. And I also love poetry because of the potential for healing. And I just feel that STEM and poetry and the arts, they all have the same potential to make our world better and to help us make sense of the world. So I definitely think that they're both equally as important and need to be emphasized the same way in schools.
Well said. Beautifully said. Allan, when you came to this country less than a year ago, you were introduced to poetry. And tell us a little bit how that happened in your school, because that's maybe another way in.
So another way in is, so every year, the National Endowment for the Arts and the Poetry Foundation run a program called Poetry Out Loud. So Poetry Out Loud is a recitation program that is in all 50 states and in almost every school in America. So for me, I got exposed to poetry. I mean, like I said, I was just in a class, and one of the teachers walked up to me and she was like, you want to try this? And I was like, yeah, I didn't know that was going to be a turning point in my life. But in the process of of the whole program, Poetry Out Loud. So you start at the school level, then you move on to regionals, then you move on to state finals, and you go all the way up to nationals. So each state has a state champion. So we all meet in Washington, D.C. to, compete for the national champion. So for me, I found a challenge because I was so excited, and poetry, I was just so into poetry. I didn't really care about anything else. I didn't care about the rules they had. So when I won state champion, and I was just, they sent me this state champion package, and I was just, reading through the, eligibility form for all the state champions. So I came across this line which said all participants must be American citizens or permanent residents with a valid green card. I was like, hey, I'm not that. So what does that mean? So I reached out to my school principal, and he said, we didn't see that either. So we reached out to the National Endowment for the Arts and told them, what's going on? What's up with this? They were like, yeah, I mean, those are just the rules. They've been running since 2006. And there's nothing we can do about it, so sorry, send the runner up. To me, that was like, no, that is not gonna happen. I mean, you started this, so you might as well finish it. So, so when I read that, so I was, I was shocked. I was more damaged, because I was thinking of the kids in my school, because at my school now, poetry is like a sport, everyone wants to do poetry. Hey, what sports do you play? Poetry. Oh, So I was thinking of those kids, and all of them were like, hey, I'm gonna do Poetry Out Loud next year. I'm gonna do Poetry Out Loud next year. But looking at them, all of them are in my situations. They're not American citizens or permanent residents. So I was like, I mean, I've been exposed to this, so how about I create a door so that, no one else has to face this pain and hate and torture I'm going through right now. So that's how I decided. I was like, okay, how else can I go? My school principal was like, you can file a lawsuit. I was like, what is a lawsuit? So he explained, and I was like, well, you know what, let's do that. We're definitely gonna do that. So that's how we took the National Endowment for the Arts to court, and a federal judge was like, I remember we were in court, and he was like, because they were saying it is a national interest that Allan Monga does not compete in the national point. I was like, national interest. So the judge asked the lawyer representing the National Endowment for the Arts, they were like, what harm will it do if Allan goes to the national competition in DC? And you know how lawyers are. They were like, oh, Your Honor, They were like, what are they even talking about? Like, so overall, he ruled that I can go. And after I went to Washington, D.C. and came back, I didn't drop the lawsuit. They reached out, offering settlements. They said, I should drop the lawsuit. I was like, no, it's a dog with a bone. I'm not dropping this. I definitely want this rule to be changed. And so, yeah, the case is still ongoing, and I just pray and hope with your support, if you spread the word, poetry, I think poetry should be a freedom, art and should be also a freedom, freedom of art, freedom of poetry, So, yeah, that's how I got exposed to poetry. And
bravo.
So, yeah, yeah, that's it.
Amazing. Ben, you got something?
Oh, yeah, I'll also just say on the note of poetry being a competition, I was lucky enough to go to Nebraska for National Poetry Month, and I got to judge some bouts of a poetry slam competition. It was Louder Than a Bomb, Great Plains, because Cornhuskers. But I was like amazed, like these teams had like uniforms, and they like rolled up like together on a bus, and they were all competing against different schools. And it was something that I had never seen before. And I think it's important to notice that reading and writing poetry among young people is up. I mean, it's rising. more young people are turning to poetry. They're turning to read it and write it, and to look for poetry for reflection and for stress relief. And I think it's important to notice that like this art form is growing and it's changing.
Yeah.
Gopal?
And I like to kind of say two things, but going right off you, like, I think that poetry is definitely in the minds of the young, but like personally, it's also in the minds of the old, like for my family. Just like, so my grandma is like one of the most important people in my life. And as the years have gone, like age has affected her, like as it affects everyone. And she, a lot of times, like she feels like unproductive, like there's not stuff she can do, she's getting weak. But like when I was talking to her about poetry, like she always liked reading it. But then when we started writing it together, like she was like, nah, no, like that's scary, I can't write. And then we were like, okay, like we'd write it together, so we like trade lines. And then we like slowly build this thing together, and like she would start crying like this, and that was a purpose for her, that she has these memories, she has these stories that she always told, but now she can like crystallize them in this form that's artistic for her too. And also I'd like to just talk a little bit about the program that brought us here, brought a lot of us here. It's called the National Student Poets Program, and what we do is there's 5 from the country, 1 from each region, so I'm from Southwest, being from Dallas. I was on it last year, but I'm an alum this year. But yeah, what the greatest part of the program for me, there is recognition, but we spend the year serving our community. So for me, that meant like teaching young kids, elementary school, middle school, about how art and poetry kind of go together, because that's how I got into it. And we'd make art, we'd write poems together, we'd go to museums, and we'd be like, these places where kids would never go because it's so intimidating. But instead, like, treating these artworks as like, just like things on a wall, like you can make fun of them, you can hate them, you can like them, and like, if you really engage with it in a humorous, like, lively way, that's how poetry kind of courses through you and into the page. And I think that, like, education systems overall, poetry is tough to teach because it's like this old big thing, but if you approach it through like small funny ways, like let's make fun of that art, write a poem making fun of that artwork, like that's dope, like that's how kids get into it. So I think that's what education should do forward, like just try to have fun with it.
Could one of you talk a little bit about what you've gone through the last couple of days here, which has a relation in a sense because it could be kind of forbidding. We sent you a bunch of readings that some of them were probably more accessible than others. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the seminar that you've gone through and what you're thinking.
It's been a very new experience for me, but a very, very positive one. We were able to study a lot of readings with Jeff.
Professor.
Who we owe so much to, and we learned so much in the past few days, and I'm really grateful for that. But just adding on to the previous question, about arts education in our schools, I think that we can't have that conversation without adding the perspective of the large public schools, there are so many of these in the United States. The large public schools with several thousand students, where 97% of the student body is Hispanic, over half low income, like the one that I graduated from. And I have not taken an English class in over a year, which is a little concerning, considering that where I'm going to college. And I'm not prepared. So, where are you going? Harvard. Thank you. And that is because I finished all of the English courses that were available at my school, and by the first semester of my junior year. And that's, I'm not trying to complain. I am saying that to expand, to bring poetry into these spheres, and to bring the arts into these spheres, you first need to address educational inequity. And the reason why some schools have more courses than others, and the reason why in some schools nothing is really emphasized in a way that's conducive for the students. So, yeah, and the current question. The past few days have been really transformative, and I'm really grateful to Damian, to everyone that's been involved in this, to Jeff, to all of the people that have made this a transformative experience.
Kinsale, you want to bring it on home? Mm-hmm. You want to bring it on home?
Sure.
Last comment. Yeah.
Okay. I'll talk about my high school experience too, and then get a little into how amazing it's been being here. My high school, it was very theater oriented, so there was a lot of support for performance and also athletics. We also had a very strong supportive environment for athletics, but what I saw was inequity in ethnically with the students of color who felt like their voices were not being heard, especially the writers. And I didn't notice this until my junior year of high school when I had just started getting into poetry. I'm now a graduated senior, but this was over a year ago. And I noticed once I started getting into poetry how little support outside of the classroom there was for that art form and for writing in general. This year, I focused on bringing poetry to Native youth in my region. We each do a service project, and you should ask all of us about them if you have time, because like my fellow poets have done incredible things throughout the year and are currently doing them. Annie and Ben are still executing theirs now. But what I realized was young people of color who write, who are usually of lower classes, lower income, have no support for their art and their writing. And I wanted to bring that to Native youth who have historically lived through generational trauma, have been taken from their parents, have been put in boarding schools, have faced racism and oppression, and they don't know how to respond. But poetry for me was my healing, and I was so blessed to have been empowered by the National Student Poets Program to bring it to them as a means for their healing. And Jurassic Park, like this is random, but I'm reminded of this line from Jurassic Park where he goes, "Nature has a way. Nature, she always finds a way." And I think that for me, it's poetry always finds a way. When I got to the school of Native kids that I worked with this year, I had found that they'd already found poetry on their own. They just didn't know what to do with it. Kids are drawn to art and writing and poetry. They just sometimes don't have the tools to explore it even deeper. And I think, first of all, going to those communities that have lived through this trauma and don't know how to cope with it, giving them the tools to develop their art is such a powerful vehicle for them, and it can do so much good. And I'm so grateful to have seen that firsthand this year.
That's it. I think that was such a beautiful testimonial, and I think that's where we should leave it. I want to thank all of you for joining us, and I want to thank them. And more poetry. That's right, the freedom of poetry.